My name is Nick Baker. I'm Senior Vice President of AEG Global Partnerships. Thank you to the committee for the opportunity to speak today. I know some of the members are very familiar with AEG, but a bit of background. Anschutz Entertainment Group is a privately owned and operated organization based in Los Angeles. Phil Anschutz is our single shareholder and CEO. We are based in Los Angeles at LA Live, our multi-billion-dollar entertainment district across the street from Staples Center, which really is a perfect showcase and description of AEG as a whole. We are one of the world's largest sports and entertainment companies in the world, and it is a collection of hardware and software assets. The hardware are the venues that we own across the world, and that spans 5 continents, and the sports teams that we own, including the Los Angeles Kings, Los Angeles Galaxy here in this state, as well as music assets some of you might be familiar with in the state of California, such as Coachella and Stagecoach. My specific role within our organization is overseeing our sponsorship and premium seating revenue across North and South America, which consists of those venues, teams, and music assets. Before I jump into the specifics on our relationship with DraftKings, I wanted to just provide this committee an understanding of the significant role sponsorship relationships play in the successful construction and operation of arenas and stadiums. As I'm sure very many of you are aware, that contractually obligated income has allowed a company like AEG to commit the resources necessary to privately finance our venues across the world, especially here in the state of California. So certainly at the core of AEG, our corporate partners are a big part of the success and enable the growth of our organization. Specific to DraftKings, the partnership was built upon shared values and objectives to enhance the fan experience. It began at the beginning of the 2014 and 2015 Los Angeles Kings NHL season and has recently expanded into a partnership with Staples Center. I have some handouts which I can hand to the committee, which further describes a 5,400 square foot restaurant lounge that DraftKings has entitled at Staples Center. This is an interactive area for our fans to congregate prior to games, during games, and after games. It features television events that are taking place in the world of sports, both within Staples Center at that time, but throughout the country. It has truly transformed our arena, which we, as are proud to say is always on the cutting edge of live entertainment. And this lounge has enabled us to offer our fans a new and enhanced experience with the partnership through DraftKings. From my perspective, that would be the conclusion of my comments, and I turn over to Natasha.
Hi, thank you. Natasha Fitzgibbon, Senior Director of Partnership Development at the Golden State Warriors. So thank you for having us today. The Warriors organization collectively provided their comments and sent me today with some testimony that I wanted to share with you. Thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony with respect to the key role played by fantasy sports in the state of California sports industry. For the past 2 years, the NBA champion Golden State Warriors and DraftKings, a leading daily fantasy sports operator headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts, have had a mutually beneficial sponsorship relationship, enabling Warriors to engage our armchair fans and turn them into true sports fanatics and members of the Warriors family. The skill contest offered by DraftKings increased the knowledge and the interest of everyday fans, therefore deepening our connection with the members of our core fan base. While it is estimated that over 50 million Americans participate in some form of fantasy sports, such members only tell half the story. For the Warriors specifically and the NBA in general, the true importance of our relationship with DraftKings lies not only in the quantity of people who interact with the fantasy sports games, but in the quality and in the depth of those interactions. We fundamentally believe that allowing participants to play the role of general manager by constructing teams of real-life NBA players and compete against similarly situated fans in skill contests brings our fans and our potential fans closer to our game, thus increasing interest in and overall consumption of our product. Participants in fantasy sports contests are more likely to tune into our games, whether we are engaged in a 24-game win streak or enduring a heartbreaking loss in Milwaukee, thereby increasing the value of our content as well as our ancillary programming. In addition, DraftKings helps us target one of our key demographics, are individuals between 25 and 35 years of age who are college educated and passionate about sports. We, along with our other team sponsors, are laser focused on attracting these customers, and DraftKings delivers this. In summary, the increasing popularity of fantasy sports is beyond measure, and its future in the state of California is important to the sports industry as a whole, not to mention the Golden State Warriors, and it could have substantial impact on our business. Fantasy sports are a widely popular and overwhelmingly accepted form of entertainment throughout the United States, and California fans deserve the opportunity to participate in this activity. We therefore urge you to consider legislation affirming that fantasy sports may continue to be offered in California. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for your testimony. Maybe you could explain in a little more detail or perhaps some kind of tangible results. The suggestion seems to be that the operation of daily fantasy sports is increasing interest, driving fans to your product. Are you actually seeing, are ratings for games going up? Is there actual tangible results of that, or is that just the hope?
I could answer that just from a Los Angeles Kings perspective. We've had a great problem to have is that our games are sold out. So for close to 160 straight games, we have sold to maximum capacity, which for us is a need to then provide content to the fans that are unable to attend the events. What this game allows is our fan who is not going to the game that night to have increased interest in that particular game and to continue to follow that game. Live television has allowed that to happen. So we have seen year-over-year growth on our television ratings in the last 2 seasons, which potentially could be, an impact that DraftKings has helped in some capacity.
And that's the same concept then behind you referenced the lounge at the facility.
Yeah, the lounge is about enhancing the experience. We're in the live experience business, and so what the lounge has done is allowed our fans to have an opportunity to come to the game earlier, which is increased food and beverage opportunities, revenue for us, but for them to be in the mix on other games that might be taking place in that particular night across the NBA or the NHL, a new destination to meet up with friends, enjoy a longer stay, dwell time, and per cap, which increases our business. At the same time, it's also allowed us to highlight the technology of our other partners. So Toshiba, Microsoft, or other partners of Staples Center, their products and services are within the lounge, which enable a greater fan connectivity, allows us to data capture and better understand the exact fans that are in our building, which has great growth potential for our business.
Any questions from there? Mr. Linder.
Thank you. I wanted to know if there was any interleague regulations as far as whether or not the owners of any of the sports franchises can participate as stakeholders or investors in any of the major daily fantasy sports companies.
I'm not qualified to answer that.
Yeah, nor would I be.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Levine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've talked kind of broadly about the connection to fans that DFS provides for your teams. Winning has done a lot for your teams as well. I remember going to Warrior games, and a few years ago, I'm not a fair weather fan. I've got my Niner mug. A few years ago, and then every season, if you told me the name of the guy who would call me, he would call me to sell season tickets. I'm not getting those calls anymore. I don't think you're having a hard time selling those tickets. But talk, and congratulations for all that. You put great product on the floor. They're great players. Talk to me about what these sponsorships mean for your bottom line. What does this look like? What does this impact for your revenue model?
From an AEG perspective, as I mentioned earlier, it is a critical component to the financial success of our organization. It is truly at the foundation of what AEG stands for as our partners. They have believed in the vision of development of areas like Staples Center and LA Live. They've believed in franchises such as the Los Angeles Kings, the LA Galaxy, and have looked at that platform as such a valuable means for them to message their products and services. It is hard for me to define just how important it is and critical to us.
What is the dollar value of a sponsorship for your teams?
Sponsorships across, can range in the 5 to 6 to 7 figure range.
On the importance, I would concur with Nick. It allows us to build the entertainment around our in-arena, our broadcast, our digital channels, content development. A big direction in sports is to bring fans behind the curtain, and I think, as I described earlier, the analytics of the game and shot percentages and rebound percentages and defensive metrics that are used really bring to life the sport and educate fans further. The funding and the sponsorship packages enable us to invest in those, and that's what we use the partnerships to do.
So it's interesting, the sponsorships that impact major sports. In the NCAA, the president, Mark Emmert, wrote in August a letter to DraftKings and FanDuel requesting that the companies don't that they cease and desist offering fantasy sports games on college sporting events because, and I quote, they were inconsistent with our values, bylaws, rules, and interpretations regarding sports wagering, as well as possibly a violation of UGA and PAPSA and various state laws. So how is it that NCAA comes up with this type of determination, believing that it's prohibited sports wagering, but professional sports are fine with it? Do you guys communicate at all and talk about its impacts on your leagues?
I wouldn't be qualified to comment on that.
Nor would I. We, from an AG perspective, don't have involvement on the NCAA, nor could comment on it.
All right. In Major League Baseball, they have some very famous rules about betting on the game, in particular for people who play the game, but also any player, umpire, club official, or employee who bets on games. Everything from year-long bans to lifetime bans. So when it applies to DFS, whether it's betting or not betting, do you allow betting on your sport today by your employees through DFS?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
Nor would I.
I might remind you, Mr. Levine, this particular informational panel was geared towards the marketing perspective, so I don't think we've got necessarily the right folks to go to the intent of your question, I think.
All right, point well taken. Thank you. Thank you.
You can. Do we have any additional questions? Okay, well, thank you for your testimony. I think at this point, we also had representatives from the Sacramento Kings and the 49ers who wanted to read a statement into the record, and so we'll take those statements at this time. Thank you all. Welcome.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Sean Kundu. I'm here today on behalf of the San Francisco 49ers. We just wanted to thank you for holding this hearing today. The 49ers have a sponsorship, a long-term sponsorship with Yahoo that includes fantasy sports, and that relationship has been good for us and our fans. We will be submitting written testimony today, but we just wanted to go on the record that we are supportive of this industry.
Thank you. Jay Harris, appearing on behalf of the Sacramento Kings. We appreciate the opportunity to submit the testimony on the topic that is important to our organization and our fans, the future of fantasy sports in the state of California. In February of 2015, the Sacramento Kings announced a unique and innovative sponsorship agreement with DraftKings, a leading provider of daily fantasy sports, and we have been proud to partner with them ever since. Our relationship with DraftKings has benefited the organization in three substantial ways. First, as a fast-growing and industry-leading daily fantasy sports provider, DraftKings allows us to utilize technology to grow our fan base. Fans can access the Kings and DraftKings on a variety of devices and channels to learn more about our players and other players across the National Basketball Association. Our partnership allows us to engage fans through the methods they prefer and are drawn to use. In fact, third-party research shows our fans' participation rate in fantasy sports has grown by 40% since the year prior. The second, the use of data and technology to connect with fans is of crucial importance to the Kings. The NBA audience trends younger and seeks different entertainment and engagement experiences than other sporting ventures. Through our partnership with DraftKings, we can access our fans and targeted demographics directly. Data enhances our ability to understand what we can do to create better interactive experiences with fans and users through the use of DraftKings Fantasy Play or throughout other outlets within our organization. Third, DraftKings provides users with a connected and interactive experience. Fantasy gaming enhances the sporting experience by inviting fans into the front office. It allows fans to assemble their own teams of real-world NBA players and lets them make the decisions instead of being just spectators. They can test their knowledge and sports acumen by competing against other fans. The fan experience is evolving beyond purchasing tickets to an event and now includes the personal thrill of winning. Fantasy sports are becoming a part of the national sports culture and will have a positive impact on teams throughout California. Fans are looking for ways to grow their connections to teams and players. Further, as an organization, we want to ensure that we find ways to connect with our fans and customers through emerging digital channels. Limiting the ways Californians can interact and engage with teams would impede a model for our fans to connect and our business to grow. As a state, we should be supporting the use of emerging technology and interactive platforms to build flourishing businesses. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. At this time, we will go ahead and return to the second panel listed on the agenda, the industry perspective on daily fantasy sports operations. If the panelists would please approach and proceed with their testimony.
Thank you. These are the guys that have the nice suits.
Yes, that can afford lots of money.
Well, I mean, those were sports teams. So I was asking sports teams how sports teams regulate their Yeah, they don't work for the sports teams. But they might know who has. Sure. Okay, sure. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Welcome and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Gray and the members of the committee for the opportunity to testify here. My name is Peter Shanke, and I'm the chairman of the Fantasy Sports Trade Association. I'm also the founder and president of RotoWire.com, a leading information website for fantasy sports. I founded the website almost 20 years ago when fantasy sports were just starting to be played on the internet. I'm a small business owner based in Madison, Wisconsin, who made this industry my profession because I'm passionate about playing fantasy sports and helping so many enjoy the hobby. I know it's hard to believe that a trade association for fantasy sports even exists, let alone that it has over 300 members, including ESPN, Yahoo, CBS Sports, Fox Sports, NFL.com, and NBC. But it exists for a simple reason. Fantasy sports have become our new national pastime. Over 50 million Americans, including over 6 million Californians, participate in these contests each year. And they do so because it's a form of entertainment that gives them a deeper appreciation for the sports that they love. California is a major beneficiary of the booming fantasy sports industry, which is experiencing exponential growth, providing jobs to Californians and contributing to California's economy. Over 50 fantasy sports-related businesses are headquartered in California, from large fantasy sports-related companies like Yahoo, Fox Sports, NFL.com, and DirecTV, to daily fantasy sports operators such as Draft Ops, Topline Game Labs, and Fantasy Aces, to a host of innovative startups and longtime content companies such as MastersBall.com. I recognize that not everyone in this room is familiar with fantasy sports and how they work. So as a result, I thought it might help if I used my time today to provide a short primer. I know that for some of you, this issue has come out of nowhere. In fact, some may be under the impression that fantasy sports didn't even exist until the first week of September, when everyone started seeing all those ads. Or the first week of October, when it seems like every journalist in America wrote an article about this topic. The truth is that fantasy sports have existed for 35 years. And while there have been innovations, like head-to-head contests, the concept has remained the same throughout. The objective is to select a team of real-world athletes and participate against others based on a scoring system that turns on real-world statistics as opposed to the outcome of the game. Let's use fantasy football as an example. Players typically draft or select a team of 9 real-world players to fill positions like quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and kicker. Like any owner or general manager, the goal is to assemble a team of players that will accumulate the most points. A running back, for instance, earns 1 point for every 10 rushing yards and 6 points for a touchdown. Between us and the other 100 people in this room, it can get pretty wonky. But again, I want to emphasize, fantasy sports isn't about who wins or loses the game. It's about who performs the best in certain statistical areas. Let's see if I can get this to work. Uh-oh. What do you think? AV issues, fun. Let's see, we got, there we go, perfect. Take Eli Manning, for example. He threw 6 touchdowns against the Saints last month, yet Eli's team, the New York Giants, lost. My team, the Shanky's Lambeau Leapers, however, had a tremendous day. Eli led my fantasy team to a big victory over an old college friend. Now, let's turn to the weekly or daily format. I think there's a view out there that these contests are drastically different from the traditional season-long format, that the latter is more akin to chess, and while the weekly or daily format is akin to roulette or slots. Nothing could be further from the truth. The two formats are virtually identical. All of the same basic principles found in the season-long format exist in the daily or weekly format. You need to assemble a team of 8 to 10 real-world players. You have to fill multiple positions with players from different teams, and those players earn points throughout the exact same scoring system that we use in my season-long league. The only difference is the duration of the contest. Rather than wait until the end of a 17-week season to crown a champion, a daily or weekly contest takes the place over the course of a single day or weekend. Think speed chess versus traditional chess. Let me demonstrate it for you. This is one of the first screens that you'll see when you enter a fantasy football contest on one of the 2 leading daily fantasy sports providers. As we discussed, you need to assemble a roster of 9 real-world football players who can fill all the positions that I mentioned earlier. Now, unlike season-long contests, there's no draft. Instead, every real-world player on an NFL roster is available to you. The one major caveat, like a real-life NFL general manager, you have a salary cap for your team, or in this case, $50,000. As I'll demonstrate in a moment, each player is assigned a fictional value. In this case, the salary cap is $50,000, or roughly $5,550 per player. That means that to win, you have to engage in a bit of game theory. You can't just select the best players. They cost too much. You've got to be strategic. Let's start with our quarterback. On the left is the QB's name. The next column is the opposing team. Let's see if I can get that. The next column is the opposing team that the quarterback is facing this week. Next to that opponent is the ranking. This is the statistic that is used to determine the projections for future weeks versus the opponents the player is playing. The next column is the average number of fantasy points he scores in a game. And finally, the fictional salary the site has assigned to him. So as you can see, we have some great options. Let's start with Tom Brady. He's a superstar, and he's having a great year, both on the field and in the courtroom. But before we pick Tom, let's click on this little button and get a little better at his statistics. Now here's why skill is so important in fantasy sports. The better players, or the ones who win more often than they lose, don't just pick the most players, the most popular players. They spend lots of time looking at other factors, like the weather. Tom is playing in Foxborough, which I think is supposed to be sunny this weekend. Or maybe it's very dark. They also look at his opponent. In this case, Brian Rockpo, who has 7 sacks for the Tennessee Titans, and factor how that could impact Tom's performance. They look at injury reports and evaluate just how important it is that Rob Gronkowski, Brady's favorite red zone target, is back in the lineup after a knee injury. But now, LeGarrette Blount, a short yardage powerhouse, is out for the season. And finally, accounting for all these variables, they assess whether it's worth spending 1/6 of their fictional salary on Tom Brady, when less expensive options like Tyrod Taylor of the Buffalo Bills is available. Ty Rod is a relative bargain at $5,600, or $2,200 lower than Tom. But there are a few factors to consider. He's playing at home this weekend. That means he could be playing in snow, which could have a major impact on how he performs. It's also unclear how Sammy Watkins, one of his top receivers, will fare in the snow. Sammy is from Florida and went to Clemson University, and last I checked, there's not a lot of snow in South Carolina. So maybe he's not a bargain after all. Then again, Tyrod is currently 5th in the league in passer rating, just behind Tom Brady. He's not a high-volume thrower, but he's been plenty effective. And it's worth noting, these are the factors you rarely take into account in a season-long contest. You're pretty much stuck with the players that you drafted at the start of each year, and whatever's available on the waiver wire. Now, time's limited, so let's skip ahead. Here's what a fully completed lineup looks like. Players accumulate points just like they do under the season-long format. And just like the traditional season-long format, the fantasy team that accumulates the most points wins the contest. And I can tell you this from my experience. Whether participants win or lose depends entirely on the amount of time, research, experience, and talent, otherwise known as skill, that he or she has relative to the other players in the contest. In fact, the most common excuse that someone gives when I ask whether they play fantasy sports is, I just don't have the time. You don't hear that about roulette, blackjack, or other games of chance. And that's because, unlike those contests, there is no systemic chance. Winning and losing does not come down to the spin of the wheel, the roll of the dice, or the turn of the card. It comes down to skill. But don't just take my word for it. Ask Congress. In 2006, they passed the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act. Now, that statute does not preempt state gambling laws, as we heard earlier today. If it did, we probably wouldn't be here today. But what it does is define what is and what is not internet gambling. And it specifically exempted fantasy sports that meet certain criteria from this definition. As a legal matter, that doesn't mean anything at the state level. As a practical and policy matter, however, it's been extremely important. Simply put, Congress studied the issue and determined that fantasy sports contests could be constructed in a way that would take them out of the definition of unlawful internet gambling. Or in the words of one group, the typical fantasy sports league is not gambling because winning is based predominantly on skill and knowledge about the fantasy sports and its athletes, not on chance. In other words, fantasy sports leagues challenge the participants to exercise judgment-making skills similar to a coach or general manager. Now, those aren't the words of some fantasy sports advocate. That statement comes from a 2012 guide that the group Stop Predatory Gambling prepared for state lawmakers. Now, I've hit this point pretty hard, but there is one more important group that has recently weighed in on the issue, and that's the experts. Over the past several months, professors at MIT, University of Chicago, and other esteemed universities have confirmed that skilled players dramatically outperform computer-simulated players in head-to-head DFS contests. I'm talking 82 to 95% of the time. Those results are a lot closer to chess than they are to poker. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Peter. Chairman Gray and members of this distinguished committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Griffin Finan, and I'm counsel for government affairs for DraftKings, one of the two leading daily fantasy sports providers in this country. I would like to thank the chairman and his staff for organizing this important hearing. Today, you will hear from just a few of the estimated 6 million Californians who have come to love the challenge and the excitement that fantasy sports offers. These are fans who pay an entry fee, typically $3 and almost always less than $30, for the opportunity to compete with their friends, family, or other sports fans in a game that tests the player's skill and knowledge. You will hear from industry analysts who will explain that daily fantasy sports is an engine for economic growth in California, both in terms of the jobs it creates and the attention it draws to sporting events throughout the state. You just heard from some of our valued partners who told you about the benefits that daily fantasy sports brings to professional sports teams throughout California, from the Kings in Los Angeles to the Kings in Sacramento to the Clippers and the Warriors. Those partners detailed for this committee the work we do together and the value of the increased fan engagement as a result of our mutually beneficial partnerships. Partnerships that benefit the fans in the arena and those seeking a second screen experience at home. These are games of skill, not chance. They involve entry fees, not bets or wagers. DraftKings receives a predetermined administrative fee not a percentage of the contestants' winnings. And DraftKings never competes against its own customers. Californians' enthusiasm for daily fantasy sports, the benefits that daily fantasy sports bring to the economy and to our partners, the legality of daily fantasy sports, all of those are important points. But I would like to add one more, which for today's purposes may be the most important. DraftKings is eager to work with this committee. We look forward to engaging cooperatively with you to craft common sense legislation that protects Californians' right to compete in daily fantasy sports contests, legislation that adopts appropriate consumer protections, legislation that promotes fair competition in this new and growing industry. This is a matter of public policy that belongs before the legislature, not the courts, which lack the benefit of input from constituents and the sort of public dialogue we are seeing here today. Now, in many industries, the leading companies tend to resist oversight and regulation. They may perceive a trade-off between their own bottom lines and the public interest. At DraftKings, we know the two are mutually reinforcing. Indeed, DraftKings already is an industry leader in user safeguards, and we would welcome a regulatory environment that holds all daily fantasy sports companies to the high standards we have set for ourselves. For example, DraftKings prohibits minors from competing in daily fantasy sports contests, and to promote transparency, it prohibits users from playing with multiple accounts. All daily fantasy sports companies should do the same. To promote confidence in the integrity of the contests we offer, DraftKings prohibits its own employees and employees from other daily fantasy sports companies from participating in those contests. We also prohibit our employees from playing on any daily fantasy sports site. We also prohibit our employees from disclosing any proprietary information. After all, these are games of skill that rewards knowledge about sports, and access to this information would be unfair to our players. And DraftKings provides its users with resources to ensure that they have a fun and safe experience. We have onboarding procedures to educate players about the games. We have means by which new players can avoid competing with more experienced players. We allow players to set self-imposed limits on their entry fees, and we take pride in our customer service and grievance procedures. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, at DraftKings we share your commitment to a transparent, safe, affordable, and fun form of competitive entertainment for California sports fans. These are our values, and they have to be. Our players' trust is our most valuable asset. We strive every day to build it and every day to keep it. I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to working with you. I'm happy to answer any questions.